Avoid moving to Idaho unless you can handle these 11 things. I have them written down right here for those of you thinking of moving to Idaho. You probably want a better way of living in one of the top states in the country, but what if there were some things that could turn that move into a big mistake? Today we're going to talk about these 11 things that you need to know and some that people aren't really talking about to make sure that moving to a place like Idaho is really going to be the right choice for you. My name is Brady Fagel. I am an Idaho local and I'm a real estate agent. So I have a unique perspective of both living here my whole life and learning from the people who recently moved here. If you have any questions, shoot me a text or a call anytime. Now, the things that some people just can't handle, we are going to dive deep into everything that causes issues for people moving here, but I'm also going to try and give you some solutions for some of these problems. That way you have both the things you need to be able to handle and then some ways to solve that problem to truly see if Idaho is a place that you should avoid moving to. I'll start off here with number 5 and stay until the end where I talk about the number 1 thing that I think people really just can't handle about Idaho, or it's a major topic that some people would really want to avoid. But number 5 on the list is something that I was completely unaware of until I started asking friends that moved to Idaho. And I love food, and I always thought that there was plenty of options in Boise, maybe not in other parts of Idaho, but Boise has some amazing restaurants, or at least to me. But if you are a foodie, which apparently I am not a foodie, then you will not be happy with Idaho. Apparently it's just not enough for people who really enjoy doing that stuff. The people I talked to said this is on their list of things that they can't stand about Boise in particular, and it only gets worse after that. They say they wish that there was more food diversity and that there's not nearly enough Chinese or Korean or barbecue places, and just overall the food scene here. Boise does have some great options, but after thinking about it, it is definitely limited to only burgers, breakfast, and steakhouses. We have places like Wild Child Burgers that are one of my favorites. We have Biscuit and Hogs that has some of the best and biggest breakfast food. I'll throw up a photo here to show you how big the portion sizes are. And then we have a number of other great restaurants and breweries, but it is limited to those categories. And if you move anywhere else in Idaho, there will almost be no options. This is one of the reasons. It's a little one, and it's kind of just a fun one and probably limited to those of you who really love food. But stay for the end. I do have some more serious stuff on this list. I just wanted to start it off with something a little bit more lighthearted. And then of course the number 1 reason that's something many people will want to avoid. Number 10 on my list is something that I really struggle with, and it could definitely be higher on some people's list versus others. But if you are someone with allergies, they are a huge problem in Idaho. Some people didn't even know that they had allergies until they moved here. So usually they are worst in the spring, starting at about May and then lasting through around June. And unfortunately, there are also fall allergies, and some people even get winter allergies here. So if you don't have allergies and you move here and you get them, expect dry eyes, runny noses, fatigue, and it feels kind of like a mild cold for 2 months. The other part of this is a major thing that people can't handle with kind of that allergy, is it fits right in there, is for those of you in California, you might be used to it, but it's the smoke that Idaho gets, especially in late summer. I have had clients excited to move to Boise. Idaho was at the top of their list. Then they visited this last summer during the smoky season, and they completely removed Idaho as a place that they were going to live. Their allergies were so bad that from the smoke that they didn't move here, and they crossed Idaho off their list completely. I also know people who have had to hospitalize their kids who had bad asthma. So it can really affect people here. This year, it was a really bad year. It was smoky for almost a month straight, to the point you didn't really go outside, and some days you couldn't see farther than a mile. But most years we have about 2 weeks of some smoke, but you can usually still see for miles, and it doesn't affect people nearly as much. So if you can't handle the smoke in the summer, you might want to avoid moving to Idaho, or you can just escape to the mountains and other cities in Idaho during July and August when that smoke comes in. Number 7 on the list is for those of you who have kiddos or plan to have them. Idaho is constantly ranked in the worst 5 states for education. In Boise, there are some public schools that are okay, but for the most part, all of Idaho has a subpar education when you compare it to the rest of the country. In most cities, you will also have overcrowding in classrooms, with some of the schools in Idaho having 30 to 40 kids in one room. The good news is, if you are looking at the Boise area, there are a ton of charter school options that are completely free. You just have to get on a waiting list and get accepted into the school. Most of the charter schools here rank higher than the national average, and they are amazing schools. I went to one for about a year, and I have friends that have kids at some of these charter schools, and it's a great alternative, as well as the wide range of private schools in Boise. But if you want a good education at a public school for your kids, you might want to avoid moving to Idaho. And one thing I forgot to mention is the homeschooling. Idaho has some of the best homeschooling resources and programs in the entire country. Number 6 on my list is a more recent issue. It's something that some of you from Seattle or Portland and LA might kind of laugh at, but the growth of Boise has increased the traffic to a point that is now really a reason to avoid moving here. If we are talking about the other cities in Idaho, like Twin Falls, Idaho Falls, or even northern Idaho, then you will have no traffic in those cities. But if Boise is where you were thinking of moving, then you might want to avoid Idaho. And before we kind of go into the next topic, I do want to touch on how much of a problem this can actually be for some people. I have had a couple people visit Boise and completely change their mind because they realized how bad the traffic is and how much it's grown. So if you are someone that thinks Boise is going to just be a small town with limited traffic and nice open spaces, that's just not the case anymore. In Meridian, Boise, and parts of Nampa and Eagle, or even some of the smaller suburbs like Star, traffic can get a little rough. You can get stuck at lights for 5 minutes. It can take you 30 minutes just to get to the next suburb over, when if you drove in the middle of the day, it might have only been, a 10-minute drive. Commutes from some of the other suburbs into Boise can also be, an hour or even 2 hours on some days, when usually it would only take 30 or maybe 40 minutes. So if you can't handle traffic, or you're trying to get away from that, you might want to avoid the Boise area and look at some of the other cities in Idaho. Now, before we get into some of the things to avoid, the rest of the list that are much higher on my list, and then at the end, the number 1 item, my name is Brady Fagel again, and I make these videos every week to help people make the best decision for their families. I walk with my clients and I help them truly determine the best situation for them, even if that means Boise is not where they would be the happiest. So if you are even thinking of moving to Boise in a week or in a year, shoot me a text or an email or a call anytime. And if you have found any value in my videos, subscribe to the channel. It helps me out and it helps you not miss any videos. And if you guys trust me enough to reach out, also know that I work with my clients. I show you around. I answer the questions you have. I don't hand you off to any other agent. Number 4 on my list is home prices. So this is also a more recent one, and it is only going to get worse every single year. This is something that a lot of people do not expect. So I'll go through what the home prices actually are right now, and then you can decide for yourself if it is something you can handle. But it is something that is a real challenge for people lately, and it is another item on the list where I have had people call wanting to move here. Then I show them the home prices, and then they decide Boise is no longer going to work. For most people looking to escape and move here to buy their first home, you're going to be looking at around $350,000 starting price in the Boise area, and in other cities that can drop to $250,000. But for most people buying their first home, $350,000 is usually the entry fee, with the average price, usually right around $400,000 for people who are buying their first home, your 3-2, 1,200 square foot home. For people who need a little bit bigger home or want to be in a better area, the price will vary widely depending on what city you are in, but in general, you'll be in that $450,000 to $600,000 range. I talk about this in much more depth in other videos, but right now I want to just give you guys a good range of prices to see if you should avoid moving to Idaho or not. And the biggest problem with home prices that I see people run into is those of you who want land. Everyone thinks Idaho is full of homes on land for an affordable price, but that is just no longer the case. Back in 2017, you could find a home on an acre for $400,000 in the outskirts of Boise, but right now it is almost always a starting price of $700,000 if you want an acre, or even just half an acre if you want a decent looking home on an acre or even half an acre. Anywhere in the Boise area, you will be starting at $750,000 minimum and just going up from there. Other parts of Idaho will have much more favorable prices, but it's not going to be how it was 5 to 10 years ago. We'll go to number 3 on the list. So this is very much relates to the last reason that we just talked about, and that is the job market in Idaho. It does not have to do with the amount of jobs available. Boise has an amazing economy. It is growing. Companies are moving their headquarters to Boise. The unemployment rates is always below the national average. We have tech companies moving here. Facebook is building an $800 million data center. Micron is building an $18 billion chip plant in Boise. So jobs are available here. The issue in Idaho is the pay that comes with those. As an example, and how it relates kind of to the last topic with home prices, is in around 2017, wages were already not up to speed with home prices, and that was 7 years ago. Since then, home prices have gone up 50% or more in some areas, while wages have only increased 13%. So the gap between what you get paid and the home prices has just gotten wider. And if you are someone who needs a job here, understand that you might have to buy less home than you might like. And if you're someone who has a remote job that is higher paying, you might want to prepare by making sure that your monthly mortgage payment is something that you can afford if you were forced to find a job in Idaho later on. So if you want higher paying jobs and lower home prices, you might want to avoid moving to Idaho. The good news is that everything else in Idaho is less expensive. Sometimes it can even save you $1,000 a month in other expenses to help you afford a home here. So there are some details that can make it all work out, and I'm happy to help run through numbers and help you with a plan when it comes to some of that stuff. Number 2 is we'll go into the weather. So this is one that for some of you, it might not be that high on your list, but it will affect people differently. There are a couple issues with the weather here, but I'm going to start off with probably the most obvious, and that's winter. Winter in Idaho can be a challenge for many people and something to avoid. I think some people exaggerate what winters are actually like here, especially in Boise. For 2 to 3 months, the temperatures are usually in the mid 30s and 40s, and it usually snows around 10 times a year, with only 2 to 5 of those snowstorms actually affecting your drive. Most of the time in Boise, it snows less than an inch. And even if it snows more, it melts the same day or by the next day. If you're in northern Idaho or you're in eastern Idaho, winter is definitely worse there than in Boise. It will be a little bit colder and there's definitely more snow, but winter is really not as bad as people think. It's only bad for those of you who have never lived in an area with, 4 seasons in a winter, or people who just, hate the cold. The worst part of winter are the inversions in Boise, and the shorter days where it gets dark at 4:45, and inversions are just when the clouds get stuck in the valley and it's kind of gloomy for days or weeks at a time. And then on top of that, it's getting dark early. So it can be a little depressing in January and then part of February, depending on how long those inversions last. And then on the other side of this, if you hate the heat, you might want to avoid Idaho. Summers are much hotter than people think. They assume Idaho is a colder climate and they don't have to worry about super hot summers. But usually all of July is 95 to 105 degrees, and sometimes part of August with temperatures getting up to 110 some years. The good news is it is a dry heat, so you don't have the humid heat like you do in Texas or Florida and then Tennessee. I have also had people tell me that the sun burns more here, which they feel like it's 20 degrees hotter in the sun than it is in the shade, but in California, the shade is much closer to the temperature that it was in the sun. And then outside of Boise, especially in Mountain Home, Twin Falls, Pocatello, the wind can be a problem with 20 plus mile an hour winds. So if you are looking at the eastern section of Idaho, expect that wind to be something that is bad. Then we'll go to the last one on my list, which is the landscape. So This is something that people often get wrong about Idaho as well, especially the southern part of Idaho. Most people think Idaho is just pretty mountains and rivers with lots of trees, but the Boise area, Twin Falls, Pocatello, and Mountain Home are all deserts. It's very flat and yellow, and this is another one that has actually caused someone to take Boise off their list of places to live. And it's something that a lot of people are surprised by. I hear it a lot when people come here. So if you're someone from Washington or Oregon and you really need lots of trees, then Idaho will not have that. Yes, we have the foothills in Boise, and you can see the mountains everywhere you go in Boise, but there are much less trees and a lot more yellow grass than people would think. So if it is important to you, then you will want to look for a place in northern Idaho or even Idaho Falls where there's more of that foresty, magazine covered landscape that people probably think of. Number 8 on my list has to do with the entertainment. The first part of this one is the obvious, but Idaho does not have the restaurants and the entertainment centers that other metro areas have. The Boise area is the only city that will have really any of that, and it only has the downtown area, which has breweries, Boise State Stadium and University, which brings in a lot of concerts and comedians. We have a semi-pro hockey team, and then we have a great outdoor music scene when the weather is nice in the summers. In the suburbs, there are places like the Village in Meridian, which is a super popular outdoor mall. We have Shields, water park, and arcades like Wahoo's and Big Al's, and then we now have a Topgolf. Other than that, Idaho will not have the amount of entertainment that other metro areas have. So if you are someone who loves to have a ton of things to do, then you might want to avoid Idaho. And then the other side of this is kind of the lack of sports. So we have BSU football, and then we have the Steelheads hockey team, and that's it. And I know it's something that many people wish that Idaho had, is we had more professional sports teams and more of that sports activities. We'll go to number 9 on the list, and before we get into the number 1 reason that you might want to avoid Idaho, but number 9 is something that relates to the last topic we went over, and that is the isolation of Boise and Idaho in general. The smaller cities in Idaho will obviously have more isolation than Boise. Places like Pocatello and Idaho Falls, you will need to drive an hour to Salt Lake for any of your flights that you need to take. In northern Idaho, you have to drive into Spokane for your flights. And then in Twin Falls, you have to drive into Boise, with Boise having more limited airports than other major metro areas. Idaho and even Boise are very isolated to the other major areas as well. So versus other places where you usually have major cities around you to go do stuff within an hour or 2 hours away. Boise is 5 hours away from Salt Lake. It's 6 hours away from Portland. And then if you want to fly, you will be a little bit limited in your direct flights. And thankfully in the last couple of years, they have added a number of new direct flights, and I'll pop them up in the video here so you can look at all of the current direct flights that go from Boise to other cities. And this is definitely something that can cause people to avoid Idaho. Now, the number 1 thing that you will need to be able to handle is the politics in Idaho, but this is actually on both sides of the aisle. You need to be able to handle Republican politics and in some cases Democrat politics, and we'll go over those, but I will start off with the obvious fact that Idaho is a red state. We have not voted for a Democrat president in over 50 years. A lot of people here bleed red. If you go to cities like Star, Idaho, or Twin Falls, or really any of the small towns, you're going to see Trump signs in lawns, Trump flags on trucks, and Trump flags on flagpoles on people's property. People in Idaho want their amendments. They want free speech. They believe in God. They have beliefs that support that belief in Christ. And of course, they want their guns. You will see people here carrying guns. You can buy guns at Walmart and walk out with them. People will take their 50-round clips and go out and shoot on the weekends. And you will want to be ready for that and be able to live with that if you want to live in Idaho. Idaho also recently passed a law that states teachers will refer to their students by the gender given at birth and not any pronouns. It protects them from any lawsuits that could arise as well. And then the other side of this is the Democratic views growing in Boise. There have always been a smaller Democratic influence in the city of Boise because of BSU. Recently, there has been more going on. You will see some more pride flags than you might have before. Oftentimes, you will see more pride flags in businesses and in front of houses than you will even see American flags. The mayor of Boise is the most Democratic mayor that I can remember and probably we've ever had. There's more Pride festivals and events, and even some of those Pride festivals have recently started in the smaller cities like Sun Valley and Twin Falls and Pocatello. Many of the businesses and hospitals will have Pride stickers and name tags, but this is mostly isolated to the city of Boise. So if either of these political issues is a problem for you, then you might want to avoid Idaho. But if you are okay with everything that I just talked about and you are thinking of moving to Boise, then the most important next step is choosing which suburb you want to move to. It can make you hate your decision to move here, or it can make you love it. So watch this video here where I go through every single suburb of Boise, rank them from A to F, and give you pros and cons. Thank you guys for watching. I appreciate the support, and I look forward to meeting you in person.